Welcome to this New Thinking for a New World podcast of the Tällberg Foundation. Are we capable of fixing all that is breaking, or is it too late? In this episode, host Alan Stoga leads Juan Enriquez, one of the world's leading authorities on the economic and political impact of life science technology, and Fiorenzo Omenetto, who works at the cutting edge of living materials engineering, on a search for the upside of the global miss.
We are almost halfway through what, by any definition, is proving to be the most interesting and probably the worst year of our time. Global pandemic, economic catastrophe, deep social stress and suffering, violence, governments gathering and in some cases abusing unprecedented power, leaders failing right and left. It's been a bad year. In the face of all of this, the entire post-war framework, and more importantly, our societies look fragile. You guys surprised? Juan?
No, I don't think so. I think, coronavirus, for the most part, has been an accelerant, not a break. And so what it's done is it's taken a whole series of trends that were already there and a whole series of positive and negative movements and just accelerated the hell out of them. And so it's laid bare the extraordinary inequalities that already existed, but on the other hand, it's pushed technology faster than anybody thought it could possibly be pushed. And you have this very weird barbell effect where, on the one hand, there are sectors of society that have never been as productive before, and there's whole sectors of society that were being gradually marginalized that have now just been, burned and excluded. And it's accentuated those divisions.
Phil, what surprised you, if anything, about how fragile everything feels and appears?
Well, I don't know necessarily that it was a surprise. I think I'm disoriented a little bit because it's a confluence. It's really a confluence of effects. There's multiple things that are happening at the same time. And my observation was that this particular moment has been an amplifier of emotions, as was said before. Trends that were there accelerated, but certainly also a lot of the MOs of people involved have been amplified to the extreme, which brings really to bear a lot of the unstable equilibrium that we have been teetering on for some time. And we tend to look really more at the visceral emotions. So we tend to focus a lot on things that are going bad. Well, I mean, how could you not in a pandemic, in pandemic times, right? And when economic downturn and stress and racism and so on and so forth. But, the eternal optimist in me always thinks about the amplifier of good emotions. I think there's, to me, you're disoriented, but then you tend to try to react and try to find ways to action. And so I wasn't completely surprised because I thought that we were doing a complex social dance to begin with, to put it mildly. But I still remain, in face of all the, of all the abuse and violence and disease, I still remain very hopeful that the same amplifier of emotions is going to lead us out of this with opportunity.
Let me ask you both about one word you just used, Fio, which is we. There is a sense about the moment that we're all in this together. That is to say, by definition, a pandemic has the potential to infect anyone. The flip side, and Juan already touched on it, is that it's not really true. It does have the potential to hit anyone, but those with means are able to protect themselves much better. And we've seen from the death rates, the best way to die in this pandemic is to be old, to be Black, to be poor. And that's not just in the United States, that's across the world. And I want to keep this a global conversation. So let's talk about we. Is there a we?
So One of the things that a lot of countries have been doing for the last century is redefining their borders. So 3/4 of the flags, borders, and anthems in this world were not at the United Nations a century ago. And country after country is having debates amidst its citizen shareholders. Do we really belong to this national project? And so you've watched, the Balkans become a series of different countries, but you've also watched this debate play out across Canada. You've watched this debate play out across the Basques, the Catalans, the Northern Italians, Corsica, Scotland, etc., etc. And so that question of we gets accentuated in a pandemic precisely because of the dynamics which you're talking about, where on the one hand, societies are being ripped apart in those who are white-collar remote workers and those who are quote-unquote essential workers who still have to be exposed every day, and those who now are not workers. And you have these, enormous buckets of society that are experiencing a completely different pandemic. And you're layering that on top of a political system that was already thriving on spending billions of dollars dividing people, convincing 51% of the country in the United States and in Britain and in a series of other places that you're not like the others, that you belong to this tribe and you shouldn't even talk to that tribe. You should never identify with that tribe. You should never be a part of that tribe. Everything that tribe does, from wearing face masks or not wearing face masks, or accepting X or Y belief vis-a-vis people who are religious or people who are gay or people who are X or Y, this division has just been brutalized and accentuated and magnified by the non-we of this pandemic.
Well, and I can add to that it's particularly jarring because we is what we need to get out of this. And this is probably one of the most challenging aspects of the transition between a pre-COVID world and where we are right now. We have lived with the illusion of being global. And I think that it's important to come and think about how do we cooperate? How do we redesign cooperation between all of these factions to save ourselves in these types of circumstances?
I'm going to push back really hard on that and then ask Juan his view, because you used the word we again. I see very little evidence anywhere that there is a push towards global solutions for almost anything. We three are card-carrying members of the global elite, and most of our friends are card-carrying members of that elite and believe firmly in global solutions. But I think we're a minority of a minority of a minority. Who's going to make the case? Where are they going to make it? And how are they going to carry that global flag that, Theo, you want to see raised once again? Juan?
We're in a very strange period because people don't understand as ethics change, and they change over time. So when I was brought up in Mexico in a Jesuit school, the preacher, the teacher, my peers, my parents, the newspapers, the laws, everybody told me one of the worst things you could possibly be is to be gay. And when you look at the Gallup polls of how quickly that perception changed and how quickly you could end up from something that you were taught as a child as an absolute truth to, if you're on the opposite side, you were, an ignorant bigot and your business should be shut down. Part of what's happening is we're whipsawing societies at a rate we've never seen before. And technology has an enormous amount to do with it. We are creatures who think in linear terms. Technology thinks in geometric terms. So let's come back to your point about we. we have the ability to do things that no other society and civilization has ever done before. It's fundamentally changed the rules of economics. The rules of economics are, let's administer and figure out how to deal with scarce resources. And all of a sudden, we're in a world where we have an excess of calories, and it's not an availability problem, it's a distribution problem. And all of a sudden, we have an excess of the ability to produce bicycles, and we have an excess of the ability to produce energy, and we have an excess of the ability to produce X, Y, or Z. And so we could easily give everybody on this earth basic healthcare, basic vaccines, basic nutrition, basic antibiotics, and a roof to live under. And instead, what we've done is we've concentrated 50% of the world's wealth in 14 hands. And so when you ask the question of we, you get back to that, who is we and why aren't we acting as we? And the stakes, because of technology, are incredibly high, because what you're seeing is if we don't start to act on climate change, it's game over. If we don't start to act on weapons of mass destruction, which are becoming decentralized and DIY, it's over. If we don't start to act on, let's not leave big chunks of the world behind because a wall's not going to stop a pandemic, it's game over. So on the one hand, we have the instruments. On the other hand, the stakes have never been higher if we don't act as we.
Theo, you are an engineer. You make things and you look at problems. How do you, as someone who is very much about solving problems, how do you start solving this problem?
Well, it's interesting to ride the wave of this discussion, right? And if I think about solutions, so if I think about how to make a dent in the current situation with some actionable, diagnostic, job creation, new technology, sustainable path to help save our planet or whatever. There are still two aspects to this. There's the technological innovation aspect, which is something that is born in a lab and stays in the lab and is demonstrated in the lab and has its own sphere of influence. And then there is adoption. There is adoption and propagation of this technology, and then there is and when it spreads to the world, and that's when you start weaving what you do into the social fabric, and then you start making an impact. These two things sometimes are sometimes disconnected, and there's a bridge between one and the other that involves non-technical aspects. You start with discovery, you engineer a solution, and then you go for adoption, and adoption then becomes socially accepted through regulation, through policy, through distribution channels. And I think these are some of the things that come that I think about in terms of trying in terms of what's next, in order to do good, in order to find a diagnostic, a vaccine, a sustainable process that will save the planet, that will reduce our carbon footprint, in order to provide opportunities to people where that traditionally did not have opportunities, and create new markets, new jobs, and a new path towards wealth and welfare. You have to go beyond the lab, and you have to enter into the social and political fabric of today's economics. And these are the things that I think are tremendous challenges, tremendous opportunities, and have also the highest barriers to entry because we haven't defined a we.
The engineer, the scientist, the innovator as activist. We've seen in the discussion of health policy for the first time in many years, scientists standing next to presidents and prime ministers, and even in some cases making decisions. You're talking, I think, about a model of leadership which is got to change.
So I think one of the interesting things you're seeing is just this almost extraordinary real-time grading. It's almost like an SAT for leadership. When you look at the curve of where the entire European Union is versus where the United States is, that is just a weekly quiz on a failure of leadership. And I think one of the things that you're going to see that, could lead to we is this is really hurting every international business on a massive scale. And you're going to hear more and more business leaders whose job it is not to lead countries, it's not to find public policies, suddenly figure out, oh my God, if I just let this go and I don't get involved, it is just going to destroy everything that I've built. This whole concept of I can build a medieval city and a medieval city works, and I don't really need, the region around it, and I don't really need the country around it, and I don't really need the rest of the world. That didn't work back then, and it doesn't work today. And we are going to see value destruction events, the likes of which we have never seen, if we don't get this leadership gap and these dunces who are getting D's every week or F's every week to act in a different way.
Let's drill down on the United States. You both have the opportunity to look at the states as people who live here, but as people who aren't from here. Mexico, Italy, respectively. What do you think all in the future is?
Well, I guess I've always seen America as an exceptional place and that did things exceptionally. So when there's a crisis, it's an exceptional crisis as well. I tend to be always optimistic. I always think that we hear a lot about the bad, but I think that if I go by my theory that these trying times have amplified emotions and they've amplified attitudes, I think that they are also amplifying good attitudes as well. And so I am still hopeful in an exceptional recovery. Now, I know that this may sound a little bit naive, but I don't think it's completely out of the question. I don't think it's going to be smooth sailing. I think that some of the things that Juan alluded to stand in the way and may prove to be very, very large obstacles to overcome. However, I don't know. I think it's still, at the risk of sounding naive and romantic, I still think that there is an attitude of defiance in the face of danger that takes on very troubling aspects sometimes for people that go out in public and defy a virus by not wearing a mask, for example. But there is that same fearlessness in also trying to resurrect something that seems to have no pulse, and that is what I'm hoping for, quite frankly.
So, look, back in 2005, I was very worried about some of the trends in the United States because I was watching great countries fall apart. And so let me start from the premise. It would be a disaster, not just for the United States, but for the world if the United States fell apart and didn't recover, a leadership position that has certainly had its flaws. But this has been a beacon for so many people. It's been a beacon for some of the smartest minds in the world. It's been a beacon of entrepreneurship. It's been a beacon of eventual acceptance of some immigrants. It's getting, I think, better decade by decade. And boy, that is a hard statement to make right now. But when I think about, some of the most controversial stuff even going on today with the protests, with Black Lives Matter, and I think, okay, would the average minority be better off if you had a time machine and you plopped them down in the 1960s? Or you plop them down in the 1940s, or you plop them down in the 1920s, or you plop them down in the 1850s? The answer is no. There are horrible things going on. There is stuff which is inexcusable going on. But the resources that you have, with every cell phone becoming a broadcast station, with the ability to reach 1 million people about the plight of an individual, are resources that we just never had before. And so again, technology changes our notion of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So at the risk of angering a lot of activists, the United States is seriously flawed. It's going down the wrong path. But on the whole, if you had to bet $10,000 and not touch it for the next 30 years and just put it into an ETF in a country, I would probably put that, for my grandkids in a US ETF, because I think this country will come back. I think this country does have values that get strained, that get pulled, that gets folded, spindled, and mutilated. But I also think the arc of history has taken this place and will reverse the 42% drop in visas for foreign students, because they're the fuel for, the energy of this country in waves of Finns and Germans and Irish and Italians and Mexicans. That's what's made this country great. And it's that ability to attract, to serve as a model, that the rest of the world is kind of looking in despair at, where the hell did you guys go?
That's the fuel for we.
Yeah, we are stronger together. We are not stronger if we beat some other people, if some people are poor, if some people don't get health care, if people don't have housing, if people are angry. We are not stronger because we hurt other people. And that bullying, nasty, evil undercurrent that sometimes comes out of the United States, it's a dark undercurrent, but it's not the whole country, and it's certainly not we.
To inject a historical note, empires do overextend and decline. That is the great arc of history. It's possible that we, the United States, have reached our limit, that we lost that spark that you talked about, and that ability to integrate and make something more from than the body politic might otherwise have achieved. Theo, why is that wrong?
I think as much as we try to build walls and we try to seek comfort locally, technology has made us global, whether we like it or not. And this did not exist in the Chinese Empire, the Roman Empire, the British Empire. We are grown very dependent on one another globally. And so taking if, and I would argue that the United States is at the center, is the epicenter of this revolution, whether we like it or not, and has enabled a lot of this connectivity. And it redefines who we are. It redefines the way that we think, that we report, that we relate, that we come together with ethical values or ethical disagreements. So I think we redefined maybe what the identity of a nation is, but I don't think that it's a localized decline. An empire falls and another one rises. I think that if I think that if an empire, to echo a little bit of what Juan was saying, if the United States goes into a tailspin, the world is following in step, because the system is very, very symbiotic, and so it's going to be a global search for a new balance point. I would argue.
To go for full circle to where we started, this is the first truly global challenge to the hyperglobal period. Arguably, we're failing it spectacularly, and sometimes failure is the seeds for future success.
Well, I think the success, I can give a silly technological analogy. If when technology is successful, you forget about it, right? It weaves itself in the fabric of your life, and you just forget about it. And taking things for granted always moves your center of thought in a different context, and that may be good, or it may be not so good if you forget why and how you got to the place that you got to. So forgetting that your car has a dipstick means that at a certain point, once you take it for granted and your car doesn't work anymore, then you're forced to think again about how an engine works. And maybe this moment is we are forced to think about how our systems work, how our ethics values have been defined, how the society that we live in, that we might have taken for granted in some cases conveniently because we don't perceive the injustice that exists in other parts of society, then here we are now questioning how our car works. And so I think it's a positive thing. I think you learn again and you build it better.
What have you most missed during the lockdown? Juan?
So I think just being able to exchange ideas with people you care about. It's not the same if you're sitting across the table from somebody and you're touching them, or you're smelling them, or you're just, the feeling of an abrazo or a human contact or something like that is just so incredibly important. We are all social apes, and we like to live in tribes, and we like to share stories and share drinks and share food and share ideas. And, you can't do that in the same way across Zoom.
Theo?
I am in lockstep with Juan. I miss people. I miss being able to look at them in the eye. I miss being able to see body language. I miss. I just miss the energy that comes from seeing people move and people do the things that they do.
We'll come back to this in a couple months. We'll see whether this is an inflection point or a speed bump. Well,
this experiment could go really, really horribly wrong. This social experiment that was forced upon us by a virus. There's also this thing that it might be spectacularly right. I remember distinctly in conversations saying, that maybe we're so screwed up that what you need an equalizing event like a famine or a big natural disaster to recalibrate people and get them back to thinking about what's important rather than chasing, 10 extra Instagram likes, for example. And so, I have to say that I'm a little terrified about the divisiveness part, because the divisiveness that you see, because I was hoping actually that there would be a prevalence of coming more together, which I think you could see at the beginning of this pandemic, and now a little bit less.
Last word, Juan.
So look, this is a small dress rehearsal for what could happen if we don't act as we. And if you end up having a nuclear war, and it really doesn't matter if it's between Pakistan and India, or China and India, or Iran and somebody else, or North Korea and somebody else, it could lead to devastation on a scale that we just can't imagine. And if you didn't like sheltering in place for 2 months, think about sheltering in place for years or decades. And global warming is something similar. It's slower, right? It doesn't happen in nanoseconds. But global warming could displace half, 2/3 of the population of the planet. And it doesn't go away because you shelter in place for a week or a month or 2 months or 3 months. So if you didn't like what we're living now, think very carefully about those things that can truly alter your lifestyle and your life and your family and their future and your country. So that's why the we is so important. And that's why this is a lesson that we have to take to heart and not just say, well, I'm glad that's over, and now we can go back to fighting each other.
Houston, we've got a problem. The question is whether we have the willingness to address it. To be continued. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New Thinking for a New World podcast. We welcome your comments, and please subscribe to other episodes in the podcast app of your choice. This podcast was made possible with the generous support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.